This is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560. The Answer.
Good morning, Dan and Amy. And again, the question is, what should Trump do if anything he proposes is going to be dismissed out of hand by Nancy Pelosi, employing the same strategy she did against George W. Bush in his second term when he wanted to move towards reforming Social Security and the Ponzi scheme that is Social Security. And she didn't take the bait to offer a constructive alternative to what President Bush was proposing, didn't take the bait to engage in the conversation at all, just dismissed it out of hand. We're not going to participate. And ultimately, she was politically victorious, I guess you would say, at least for a period of time. And this seems to me like that is informing what she's doing at present, which is the same strategy. So what is a President Trump to do? He's got the possibility of exercising his emergency powers and litigating that as necessary. One other suggestion that was made by Thomas Lifson, who's editor and publisher of the American Thinker, AmericanThinker.com, good outlet, a lot of interesting opinions, he has personnel power. And if we all agree, as most of us do, that the federal government is too big, too expensive, too many people working for it, oh, and by the way, making significantly more, particularly when you layer in benefits, than their private sector counterparts, well, isn't this perhaps an opportune time to do a little bit of paring down of the size and scope and expense of the federal government, much the way President Trump has done in his first 2 years with respect to the regulatory state?
So get rid of some non-essential workers.
Well, I mean, it's sort of the term non-essential sort of screams dismissal, but the government and people's view of the government for some reason is different than the common sense they apply to their everyday life. Nobody wants to see someone laid off, but you don't stop patronizing or you don't term somebody a company evil if they lay off employees. I don't hear anybody wanting to burn Elon Musk in effigy, at least not for Tesla reducing their workforce by 7%. There may be other reasons, but not for the layoffs. I mean, it's part of running a tight operation, right? Mm-hmm. And if you concede the point that the federal government is anything but a tight operation, well, with people's focus on it right now, to some extent, why not have this teachable moment and advance the flag for smaller government? For more on this topic, we're pleased to be joined by the aforesaid Thomas Lifson from American Thinker. Thomas, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Good morning.
Good morning. So you penned a piece why you're not attending any pity parties for furloughed federal workers.
Yeah.
It seems like you want to go a little bit further than that in terms of not attending those pity parties or doing fundraisers or providing macaroni and cheese from your cupboard to the furloughed federal workers. You're suggesting that Trump consider his power to RIF some of these non-essentials.
That's correct. RIF stands for reduction in force, and that's federal government jargon for what's in private industry called a layoff. And it actually is possible to do those if people have been furloughed for 30 days and the government shutdown hits day 30 today, although because it's a national holiday, not sure anything can be done today, but possibly tomorrow if President Trump wishes to play this card. And I must state that I think he probably won't play it tomorrow, but it is a wonderful bargaining chip to hold over Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer's heads, as well as the heads of Democrats in the House who have a lot of federal workers in their constituencies, which many of them do because Democrats tend to come from big cities, and big cities tend to be where federal offices are located. So those are the most vulnerable to pressure from federal employees facing layoffs. And it can be done if the federal government publishes puts forward an official downsizing plan for various federal agencies that have surplus workers. And of course, the definition of surplus depends on the administration that's running the RIF. And so this all becomes possible today. Now there's a little bit of a wrinkle in here because the Office of Management and Budget has defined two kinds of furloughs. What they call administrative furloughs, which are as a result of downsizing plans, and shutdown furloughs, which they say don't count toward the 30-day clock. Now, this is possibly subject to litigation, but even if it is litigated, President Trump or his deputies, I'm thinking Stephen Miller, who's a brilliant thinker outside the box and not afraid of radical change, somebody could publish a plan to downsize the EPA or any of the other agencies where many of the workers spend their time at work doing things other than accomplishing the business of the people.
Yeah, well,
And,
like
that's a very
national
large
parks.
number of people.
No, I know. EPA could be one that could be downsized, but what other place? What other groups like national parks or IRS? What do you think?
Well, IRS is probably one that will be the last to downsize, but I don't have data for the current shutdown. But the last shutdown that we had, we saw that Housing and Urban Development had 95% of its employees non-essential. Department of Education, a little bit less than that. EPA is actually in fourth place with, I'm sorry, the graphic here is not very good, but in the 80s we have Commerce, Labor, Treasury even has a lot of surplus employees, or non-essential, non-essential employees.
And importantly, you have candidates who run for president, elected president on the Republican side, who routinely call for agencies going back to Reagan, like the Department of Education, like the Commerce, to be eliminated altogether, like HUD, to be eliminated altogether. So it seems to me that this would fly in formation with what Republicans have been saying for generations. Maybe they weren't serious about it before. Maybe Trump could be serious about it now.
Right. Now, abolishing an agency requires legislation, and the Democrats can block that in the House. But the beauty of RIF is that it's entirely an administrative decision and can be accomplished by administrative action in the Trump administration. So it's unilateral. Now, my view is that this is kind of the thermonuclear option for Trump, and it's probably not the card he wants to play first or next in this ongoing drama, because I think the Democrats are already feeling the pain. Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer behave as if they're in the catbird seat and refuse to negotiate. But I honestly think it looks really bad for them when Trump goes on TV, offers them stuff that they've already voted for, and they say, we're not talking, not $1. I think it turns the tide.
I wanted to get your reaction to this Pew survey that came out about Generation Z. That's the one that comes after X, or comes after millennials, right? Yeah, Generation Xers, millennials, then Generation Z. Generation Z we had high hope for because they had seen the outcomes of the Great Recession of 2008, maybe a little bit more skeptical of government's ability to problem solve, maybe a little bit more pro-life than their millennial forerunners. But Pew finds 6 in 10 believe that forms of a person's gender should include more options than man and woman.
Yep.
57% say they're comfortable referring to someone by gender-neutral pronouns. 6 in 10 approve of the NFL national anthem protests. 54% say climate change is linked to human activity. And 7 in 10 say the government should do more to solve problems, including more than half of Gen Z Republicans think that. So Generation Z looks like that may not be the cavalry for conservatives.
Undoubtedly so, for two reasons. Number one is, of course, we've lost the education system 2 generations ago, really, to the left, and they've been brainwashing the kids in schools. And number two, frankly, and I say this as somebody who's reached 71 years of age, when you're young, there's a hell of a lot you don't understand
Is
or
that
don't
right?
know or can't
Really?
fathom.
Is that right?
And so kids are always suckers for idealistic appeals. This is just a constant in human nature that people who've never lived through the consequences of, especially unintended consequences of well-meaning reforms, like rent control or raising the minimum wage or any of these things that sound good in theory but which run into human nature in practice, kids just don't have the grounding and experience to understand this. This is why throughout human history most societies have honored the elders, because they see the trouble ahead that is invisible to younger and less experienced minds. So I think we ought to raise the voting age to 35, but that's a radical view.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, we have now generations of elders who never grew up either, and so it becomes
that's
reinforcing.
a separate issue.
Yes, exactly.
It's not a life cycle issue.
Thomas Lifson, editor and publisher of American Thinker, AmericanThinker.com. Tom, thanks so much for joining us. Say hi to my friend Robert Baer, too, will you?
I will. It's a pleasure speaking with you.
Thanks very much.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
The more you listen, the more you'll know. This is Chicago's Morning Answer. On AM 560. The Answer.
Winner.